Well, Shalom, this is the audio recording of the weekly Shema Israel newsletter titled Considering Rebellion in the Wilderness. This was originally sent out as a newsletter on day 13 of month 12 on the Creator's calendar, otherwise known as February 24th, 2024 on the Roman calendar. I know that I mention the date every week, but sometimes you need to stop and let the significance of the statement sink in. The majority of the world is operating under an illusory system of time. They're still reckoning time according to an empire that dominated the world 2,000 years ago. Again, it's profound to consider the fact that 2,000 years later, we're still following the calendar of a supposedly collapsed empire that's grounded in sun worship and polytheistic traditions. In this age, when we're told to trust the science, it's amazing that the world still follows a religious calendar that honors the Nephilim offspring of fallen creation. This is particularly significant since the Roman Empire was responsible for killing the Messiah. Nevertheless, Christianity became the official religion of Rome and maintained Rome's calendar, among other things. The Roman Empire ended up as a house divided between East and West that exists to this day. Yeshua is going to come and turn it all into chaff, according to Daniel 2:35. Well, the modern calendar used by Rome was actually rooted in Babylon, and it's centered around Roman gods and Caesars. And just like Rome invented the Christian religion to hide the Messiah and steer people into lawlessness, the Roman, or should I say Babylonian calendar, continues to accomplish that same function. It directs people away from Yahuwah and his appointed times, all the while providing substitute feasts and holidays that help support the economy of Babylon. It's all part of the bread and circuses that we examined in the previous message. Most people are so distracted by the bread and circuses in this hectic modern world that they find it difficult to even stop and question time, as it literally flies by them. As a result, few are able to adequately consider the future and the possibility of the fulfillment of scriptural prophecies in their lifetime. While they may have some vague notion concerning how the world's going to end, most are so consumed with working to pay their bills that during their free time they seek entertainment and amusement to distract themselves from all their problems. The entertainment that Babylon provides is a respite from the reality of the slavery and dependence that most people find themselves in. It's really bittersweet. I field questions from people on a regular basis, and I know people are struggling just to get the correct dates to observe the appointed times, let alone actually consider leaving everything behind. The notion of actually rehearsing for a fulfillment of the appointed times is really a big deal. Yeshua said he would come as a thief, and he tells us to watch in Revelation 16:15. If you're not awake, ready, and mentally prepared, you won't be able to react if the rehearsal actually becomes a fulfillment. It's like the rich man who wanted to follow Yeshua, but he simply couldn't because he was so tethered to this world by his wealth and belongings. I'm trying to address these very practical issues because I think most people completely miss the focus of some of the appointed times due to traditions and the fact that they simply have been relegated to observances rather than rehearsals for thousands of years. They think that if they simply light some candles and have a meal, that they're somehow equipped for what lies ahead. People aren't typically thinking that they will actually see a fulfillment of the appointed time they are observing. And it's critical that we begin to incorporate that mindset into our rehearsals. Part of the adjustment requires recognizing the false reality that you've spent your entire life within. It's an artificial matrix designed to distract you from the Creator and the plan that's in place to restore mankind. Babylon is an aphrodisiac to some and a sedative to others. It can be both a distraction to people and it can put them to sleep. It's designed to keep you away from the kingdom of Elohim until you enter your final sleep, and then it will be too late. When we recognize that we're living in an entertainment-driven society full of pitfalls and distractions, it should reinforce the fact that you have not arrived at your final destination. It's a reminder that you are a sojourner, and that is an important realization for anyone born and raised in Babylon and steeped in Babylonian religion and tradition. So we need to be ready to leave and head out on a journey. That's been our focus for weeks because that is the exercise that's actually built into the appointed times. And that's why all of the patriarchs chosen by Yahuwah ended up living nomadic lifestyles. Remember that Abram originally lived in Babylon until he was told to get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. Genesis 12:1. As a result, every person in every nation that desires to follow the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob should be prepared to get out of your country. We all must be prepared to take a journey like Abraham and his seed. Of course, with every journey, you need to know when to depart, and you need a destination. The problem is that everyone seems to have their own opinion on the question of the ifs, the whens, and the hows. That's why we need two witnesses. Yahuwah provided Moses and Aaron to act as two witnesses for Yisrael. They told Yisrael that they were going to be delivered from slavery. Now, I'm fairly certain that they didn't have a newsletter or message board where they posted a detailed itinerary to every Israelite. There were tribal elders who received the instructions, and they passed those instructions on. The people were on a need-to-know basis. We now live in an age of information where everyone wants to know every little detail all the time. People are not used to being patient and in the dark on certain things, and many aren't willing to wait for the instructions from on high. That can lead to people being presumptuous. And this is why the people of Yahuwah are in such a state of confusion and division. Many of the sheep want to either be the shepherd or they don't want to follow a shepherd. Like it or not, Yahuwah built order into creation, and there is a chain of command in the kingdom. Now, I'm not promoting submission or shepherding doctrines that some cultic churches promote. Been there, done that. At the same time, we need to be careful that we don't just become a bunch of mavericks who aren't aligned with the kingdom. Recall the period of the Shoftim, the judges, when there was no king and everyone did what was right in his own eyes? Well, in case you didn't realize it, we're there. I know that many people have been burned by controlling and manipulative pastors, preachers, churches, and ministries. Once bitten, twice shy, as the saying goes. There can come a point, though, when our independence can turn into rebellion. Let's face it, Americans take pride in the fact that they rebelled against a king, and they promote and extol democracy as a virtual. These traits are not always compatible with the kingdom of Elohim. I've been in churches that operate like democracies, where the congregation votes in the pastor and they vote him out. I've also been in congregations where the pastor acts as an overlord. The problem is that none of these church models represent the kingdom of Elohim. They're artificial creations of men and religions. So we all need to step back out of our religious systems and our paradigms, our inherited mindsets, and assess whether we are really ready to walk in submission to the King in his kingdom. Last week I was reading Ezekiel, and I couldn't help but notice how often the prophet referred to Israel as the rebellious house. And just here's an example in Ezekiel 2:1-5. It says, "And he said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet, and I will speak to you. Then the Spirit entered me when he spoke to me, and set me on my feet. And I heard him who spoke to me. And he said to me, Son of man, I am sending you to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day, for they are impudent and stubborn children. I am sending you to them, and you shall say to them, Thus says Adonai Yahuwah, as for them, whether they hear or whether they refuse, for they are a rebellious house, yet they will know that a prophet has been among them." And he also talks about the rebellious house in Ezekiel 2:6, 2:8, 3:9, 3:26, 12:2, 12:3, 12:9, 12:25, 17:12, 24:3, and 44:6. So there's a lot of emphasis in Ezekiel about the rebellious house and the warnings for the rebellious house. Well, it reminded me what a problem that rebellion was in the wilderness. Here's what Moses had to say about it. Remember and do not forget how you provoked Yahweh your Elohim to wrath in the wilderness. From the day you came out of the land of Egypt until you came to this place, you have been rebellious against Yahweh. And in verse 24, you have been rebellious against Yahweh from the day that I knew you. That's Deuteronomy 9:7 and 9:24. Well, as part of your preparation for the wilderness, it may prove beneficial to see if you've got any seeds of rebellion lurking inside of you before you leave your house. We all need to learn from the mistakes of our predecessors, and as we just read, Israel was filled with rebellion from the very beginning of their journey. The wilderness is the place where all of the problems that might be hidden in Egypt and Babylon come bubbling to the surface. We've been talking about our journey in the wilderness, and addressing the issue of rebellion in the wilderness is very important. There's a significant example of rebellion in the wilderness provided through the rebellion of Korah. It's found in the text called Numbers in most English Bibles, and in the Hebrew it's Bamidbar, which literally means in the wilderness. Now, remember, when we consider the events in the wilderness, that these people, they were originally covered by the blood of the Lamb and delivered from Egypt. They had entered into covenant with Yahweh at Sinai and agreed to the terms of the covenant. So keep that in mind. But first read how Jude connects the Exodus with the rebellion of Korah. It says, starting in verse 5, now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that the Lord, Yeshua, and I've got both there. There's different translations of Jude. Some have Kyrios, which would mean the Lord, or Yahweh, and some have Jesus, which would be Yeshua. So I put them both there because in either case, it's applicable. But I find it interesting that some say actually Yeshua, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not stay within their position of authority but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire, yet in like manner these people also rely on their dreams, defile the flesh, reject authority, and blaspheme the glorious ones. But when the archangel Michael contended with the devil and was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, Yahweh rebuke you. But these people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. Woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. That's Jude 5 through 11. Jude was sending a warning to the people of Elohim who were being led astray by rebellious individuals. And I love how Jude specifically attributes the deliverance in the Exodus to Yeshua in some texts. The Exodus was all about Yeshua, and it still is. While we can be participants in the deliverance process, the focus is not on us as individuals. It's on the Lamb of Elohim and his blood covering the homes of those who trust in him, his bride. The text specifically states that they were saved out of slavery, but later destroyed because they did not believe. That reveals the glaring flaw with the Christian understanding of being saved. Yahweh can save us from physical death and slavery, but that doesn't necessarily equate to with living in paradise for all eternity. You can follow Yahweh through the waters and then later decide to murmur and even rebel against him, at which time you will be going to Sheol like Korah and his family that we're going to read about. The notion of once saved, always saved demonstrates a lack of understanding of the salvation process as revealed through the appointed times, and that's why I wrote the book Salvation, the Covenant Journey. The fact that Jude would place so much significance on the rebellion of Korah is quite profound. It's an important lesson that we should all be familiar with. So let's now read what happened in the text of Bamidbar. 16:1. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and An, the son of Peleth, son of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses with a number of people of Israel, 250 chiefs of the congregation chosen from the assembly. These were well-known men. They assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahuwah is among them. Why then do you exalt yourself above the assembly of Yahweh?" When Moses heard it, he fell on his face. And he said to Korah and all his company, "In the morning Yahweh will show who is his and who is holy, and will bring him near to him. The one whom he chooses, he will bring near to him. Do this, take censers, Korah and all his company, put fire in them, and put incense on them before Yahweh tomorrow. And the man whom Yahweh chooses shall be the Holy One. You have gone too far, sons of Levi." And Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you sons of Levi, is it too small a thing for you that Elohim of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do service in the tabernacle of Yahweh, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? And that he has brought you near him, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you? And would you seek the priesthood also? Therefore, it is against Yahweh that you and all your company have gathered together. What is Aharon, that you grumble against him?" And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. And they said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you must also make yourself a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." And Moses was very angry and said to Yahweh, "Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, and I have not harmed one of them." And Moses said to Korah, "Be present, you and all your company, before Yahweh, you and they and Aharon tomorrow. And let every one of you take his censer and put incense on it, and every one of you bring before Yahweh his censer, 250 censers. You also and Aharon each his censer." So every man took his censer and put fire in them, and laid incense on them, and stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aharon. Then Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the congregation. And Yahweh spoke to Moses and to Aharon, saying, "Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces and said, "El Elohi, of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will you be angry with all the congregation?" And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Say to the congregation, get away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, "Depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins." So they got away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents, together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. And Moses said, "Hereby you shall know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. If these men die as all men die, or if they are visited by the fate of all mankind, then Yahweh has not sent me. But If Yahweh creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive and into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised Yahweh. And as soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. And they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed around them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up." And fire came out from Yahweh and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar, the son of Aharon, the priest, to take up the censers out of the blaze. Then scatter the fire far and wide, for they have become holy. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, for they offered them before Yahweh, and they became holy. Thus they shall be assigned to the people of Israel." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers, which those who were burned had offered, and they were hammered out as a covering for the altar, to be a reminder to the people of Israel, so that no outsider who is not of the descendants of Aharon should draw near to burn incense before Yahweh, lest he become like Korah and his company, as Yahweh said to him through Moses. But on the day that all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aharon, saying, "You have killed the people." Oh, but on the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aharon, saying, "You have killed the people of Yahweh." And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aharon, they turned toward the tent of meeting. And behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of Yahweh appeared, and Moses and Aharon came to the front of the tent of the meeting, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aharon, "Take your censer and put fire on it from off the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation to make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from Yahweh, the plague has begun." So Aharon took it as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. And Aharon returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting when the plague was stopped. Well, when you first read this text, it's hard to believe that the people could actually rebel against Moses and Aharon after all that they'd been through. Wasn't it obvious that Moses and Aharon were chosen by Yahweh? If you look at it through eyes of flesh, and for people boots on the ground, or sandals on the ground, I should say, it's easier to understand what was going on. The people weren't happy, and we read these stories, and sometimes years go by, but they're doing day to day. They're living in the wilderness in these tents, and again, they weren't happy with the way things were going. They were, some of them were miserable. They didn't. Their expectations had not been met. They thought they were leaving Egypt and going to go to this beautiful, Garden of Eden, and they're still living in tents. And as a result, they took that out. It was their own doing, but they took it out on the leadership of Moses and Aharon. To the grumblers, it might have seemed like Moses didn't know what he was doing, didn't know where he was going. Maybe he shouldn't be the only one to meet with Yahweh. They wanted more information and up to the minute data, and maybe they suspected he wasn't being truthful with the congregation. Possibly he's trying to withhold power for himself and his brother. Maybe it was time for some new, fresh leadership. How about a new priest from the Levites? Why not Korah? Maybe a new priest could renegotiate with Yahweh and get some better food, get some better accommodations. Maybe move up the timeline so that they could actually go into the land instead of wandering for 40 years, wasting precious time as they thought. They seem to forget that their previous complaints had been resolved by Yahweh in miraculous fashion through his chosen one, Moses. Nevertheless, many were unhappy with the way things were going. They particularly didn't like the fact that they couldn't go to the promised land. So now they're calling Egypt the land of milk and honey. And how quickly we can forget the past when we don't like our present circumstances. It's important to understand that these people in the wilderness were waiting out their punishment period. It was a year for a day punishment. The representatives of the 12 tribes had previously spent 40 days spying out the land. 10 gave a bad report concerning the giants, and the people succumbed to the fear. They feared the giants were going to, kill their children, and so they didn't want to go in the land for the sake of their children, as if Yah, who had protected them all that way, couldn't protect their children or didn't care about their children, or if they cared more about their children than Yah did. So it was a direct affront, slap in the face to Yah once again. As a result, they would spend 40 years in the wilderness. A year for a day, that's it. Yah wasn't changing his mind. Well, that didn't sit well with many people. They were getting justice and even mercy, but they wanted the Christian definition of grace. They wanted to say they were sorry and have Yahweh just roll over and give them what they wanted. And that's how many people treat grace. They treat Yah as a pushover, as if he doesn't mean what he says or if he'll always change his mind. Well, they got their portion of grace. They sinned and they deserved punishment. Yah was graciously allowing them to live out their lives, but that wasn't good enough. They weren't satisfied and they wanted change. Hope and change, to be precise. They wanted a new order, a change in priesthood. Remember that the Levites were set apart. They assisted with the tabernacle, but certain functions were reserved for the high priest alone. Aharon and his seed were chosen from the Levites for very special duties. Many people rallied behind Korah, who was a Levite, but he was not a descendant of Aharon. There were also those from the tribe of Reuben who sought power. And remember that Reuben was the firstborn son in the flesh, but his firstborn status had been lost. So we're basically looking at a former firstborn and a Levite, both of these wanting to be elevated to a position that they just were not in a position to achieve or to receive. While the firstborn were the priests during the Passover in Egypt, those privileges did not allow them entrance into Yahweh's house. And while the Levites were given the privilege of assisting the priests, the Levites were not the same as the high priests and the priesthood. So these people all wanted to be able to approach Yahweh through avenues that Yahweh did not approve. They wanted equal rights for all Israelites. But like I said previously, the kingdom is not a democracy, and Yah has his own power structure. It's the kingdom of Yahweh is a kingdom with a king, and the king appoints the rulers in his kingdom. The people didn't like that. They wanted a new order, but it wasn't Yah's order. The people probably saw Korah every day, while Moses spent much of his time on the mountain or in the presence of Yahweh. He kept disappearing, and he wasn't posting on his blog very much. Korah was a man of the people. He was popular. He probably looked good and spoke well. Remember how Moses described himself? I'm not eloquent, neither before nor since. You have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. So on the surface, Korah probably seemed like the right man for the job. The problem was that he wasn't qualified and he wasn't chosen by Yahweh. The actions of those challenging Moses and Aharon and trying to replace the rulers chosen by Yahweh was a direct affront to Yahweh. It was also a violation of a commandment that provided, "You shall not revile Elohim nor curse a ruler of your people." Exodus 22:28. The incident involving Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and his 250 men of renown is the quintessential example of rebellion in the Torah. In Hebrew, the word for rebellion is meri. It also means disobedience, as we can see in 1 Kings 13:21. The severity of the punishment for rebellion against Yahweh's order was extraordinary and reveals just how serious Yahweh takes this matter. Sadly, this would not be the last time that a rebellious leader would be severely punished. Remember Saul, the first king of Israel? He lost his reign because of rebellion. We've heard a lot about Amalek lately as Benjamin Netanyahu has tried to justify the annihilation of the Palestinians by referring to them as Amalek. Well, King Saul was supposed to deal with that issue, but he did not follow the instructions of Samuel, the prophet of Yahweh. And we read about that as follows. Samuel also said to Saul, Yahweh sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now, therefore, heed the voice of the words of Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. So Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Yahweh. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. Then Saul said to the Kenites, Go, depart, get down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Hivlah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt, and also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. But everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. Now the word of Yahweh came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to Yahweh all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he set up a monument for himself, and he's gone on around, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed are you of Yahweh. I have performed the commandment of Yahweh. But Samuel said, What then is the bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to Yahweh your Elohim, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to Saul, Be quiet, and I will tell you what Yahweh said to me last night. And he said to him, Speak on. So Samuel said, When you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not Yahweh anoint you king over Israel? Now Yahweh sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they were consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of Yahweh? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of Yahweh? And Saul said to Samuel, But I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh and gone on the mission on which Yahweh sent me and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites, but the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to Yahweh, your Elohim, in Gilgal. So Samuel said, Has Yahweh as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he also has rejected you from being king. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of Yahweh and your words. because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship Yahweh. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of Yahweh, and Yahweh has rejected you from being king over Israel. And as Samuel turned around to go, Saul seized the edge of his robe and tore it. So Samuel said to him, Yahweh has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to your neighbor of yours, who is better than you. And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man that he should relent. Now, then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me, that I may worship Yahweh, your Elohim. So Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul worshipped Yahweh. Then Samuel said, Bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. So Agag came to him cautiously, and Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag in pieces before Yahweh in Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went to his place in Gibeah of Saul. And Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and Yahweh regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Well, what a sad story. Saul heard the command, but he listened to the people rather than the word of Yahweh. They took the best so that they could go basically throw a party. Sure, they would sacrifice the livestock to Yahweh, but they would also feast on those sacrifices. It was going to be a victory barbecue, and everybody was going to enjoy it. And also notice that along the way, Saul set up a memorial for himself and his victory. So, now he was the big guy in the block, and he was going to spread the wealth to all the people, throw a party, and claim that justified disregarding the commandment. Well, we know that Saul was a man of tall stature. He really looked the part of a king, and people followed him as people so often do. Saul, though, was apparently not confident in his calling. Unlike Moses, he felt that he needed to placate and please the people, and he lost focus on his mission. Saul's rebellion was not necessarily defiant, but it was willful disobedience. He knew what he was doing. He just thought, he had a better plan. Well, he lost the kingship as a result. Even though he regretted his mistake, he was going to be punished. He was like that generation of Israelites in the wilderness. He received mercy, but he was going to be replaced by another generation. This time it would be a shepherd king. Yahweh is not interested in charm or charisma. He's interested in obedience. That's why he chose the youngest son of Jesse to replace Saul. David was a shepherd with no real inheritance awaiting him. He was the last in line, and Yah made him first. Well, he was a faithful king who obeyed Yahweh. His son rebelled, which caused the kingdom of Israel to be divided. Eventually, both houses were expelled due to rebellion. I previously mentioned Ezekiel's references to the rebellious house. Ezekiel gave that prophecy while in Babylon, in Babylonian exile. He was there because of the rebellion of the house of Yehudah. Well, as we approach Passover, the focus is first upon our individual homes that we're going to leave. We leave our individual houses to join a greater community, the house of Israel. Rebels won't make it through the wilderness. They might not even leave the comfort and the safety of their homes. As a result, this is an important subject to address before it's time to leave. We don't want to be described as our predecessors in the covenant. We need to heed the words of the Psalms that exhort the people of Elohim to set their hope in Elohim and not forget the works of Elohim, but keep his commandments, and that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to Elohim. We don't want to fall into this category of people described by Moses. For I know how rebellious and stubborn you are. Behold, Even today, while I am yet alive with you, you have been rebellious against Yahuwah, who, how much more after my death? And he stated this right before his passing in Deuteronomy 31:27. Could you discern the frustration in Moses' words? The Israelites were rebellious through the wilderness, and he knew their rebellion was going to only get worse. We see that rebellion described through Ezekiel and other prophets. Despite all the warnings, the people continued in their stubbornness and rebellion. They were so stubborn that by the time the Messiah arrived, they couldn't even receive him. Yeshua was treated the same way that Moses was treated. Despite the miracles, the elders were not happy with him. He didn't look like a king. He didn't fit their paradigm of how the Messiah was going to deliver them from Roman oppression. He wasn't giving them what they wanted, and he wasn't fulfilling their expectations. As a result, they rejected him and even sought to kill him, just like the Israelites did with Moses. They literally rebelled against their king sent by Yahuwah. Forget January 6th. What we read about in the New Testament text concerning the conspiracy against Yeshua was an insurrection and a sedition of cosmic proportion. Well, it really hasn't changed much. Even with the advent of Christianity, people continue to reject the Messiah of Israel. Instead, they have created a lawless Christ named Jesus. People always have a tendency to find someone or something that fits their paradigm. And how many Christians today are looking for Trump to save them rather than King Yeshua? They want to make America great again, but they don't want to wait around for Yeshua to restore the kingdom and all of creation. It's no different in the Messianic movement, the Hebrew roots movements, or Torah movements. People want to follow a person or a ministry. They want new podcasts and messages on a regular basis. Well, you know what? I don't think that Moses would have had a lot of subscribers because he didn't post that often. Yeshua would probably have had a lot of thumbs down because he offended so many people. Neither of them had the appeal that the masses were looking for. They weren't slick and savvy influencers interested in getting a lot of views and likes. We all must be careful that we don't bring our desire for bread and circuses into our walk with Elohim. Nowadays, people want a smorgasbord of teachings that they can choose from. I regularly see people who are simply trying to find teachings and beliefs that appeal to them and that fit their paradigm. They chase after signs and exciting teachings, even from proven false teachers who they'll go to false teachers if they can get their appetites satisfied. And they share a lot in common with the ancient Israelites in the wilderness. These same people will then operate inside the camp, like Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and stir up and promote rebellion against the witnesses of Yahweh. And the calendar is an obvious example of that rebellion. Clearly, Yahweh only has one calendar. He's not schizophrenic. Regardless, there are people teaching and promoting false calendars that don't even meet the minimum requirements found in Genesis 1:14. When you point this simple truth out, they don't even seem to care. I see it all the time. It seems like every year someone comes out with a new calendar to promote as the true calendar. And despite the fact that the scriptures are crystal clear that the sun and the moon are the two witnesses designated by Yahuwah for time and appointed times, I regularly see people who simply refuse to follow those witnesses created and appointed by Yahuwah. The sun and the moon stand witness before Israel, just like Moses and Aaron were witnesses to Israel. Sadly, many people simply reject them and rebel against them. They want something more. They want barley, or they want to be in unity with the Pharisees by using the rabbinic calculated calendar. Some want a perfect 360-day prophetic year to fit into this corrupted creation because that's their desired paradigm. They'll ignore the Torah and they'll scour the internet until they find what they're looking for. Well, Remember that Korah and Saul were popular and eloquent. They probably had slick videos, websites, teachings, and lots of subscribers, but that didn't mean they were correct. And I hope that you get my point. Yeshua said that it is a narrow path that leads to life, and few will find it. It's important to make sure that you are on that path and that you stay on that path for the entire journey. So, while the error may seem obvious when we read about the rebellions of the Israelites, it's an entirely different thing to discern the seeds of rebellion in your own life. Don't think you're immune from any of the sins that plague the rebellious house. As long as we remain in these containers of flesh, we're subject to the sins of the flesh. And that's why we need to be filled with the Spirit, as described by Ezekiel, the one who prophesied against the rebellious house. We need the Spirit to enter into us, lift us up, and set us on our feet before we begin the journey. Remember the warning from Jude, woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. Here's the thing. People who are rebellious don't usually consider themselves to be rebellious. Many rebellious people actually think they're doing the right thing. And that is typically the problem. They're operating by what they think instead of by what Yahweh commands. Maybe Korah and the people who followed him thought they would help improve things for the Israelites. Saul probably thought his change in plans was harmless and motivating for his people. At the heart of rebellion is disobedience. A rebellious person is one who defies Yahweh, his instructions, and his order. It usually involves pride and stubbornness, as well as a lack of humility and an inability to submit to the will of Yah and his messengers. Here's the advice that Yahweh gave Israel at Sinai as they were about to go to the promised land. He said, behold, I send a messenger before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you carefully obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. This is good advice to remember for the prophesied future Exodus. There will surely be challenges. The point of these tests is to determine what lies in your heart. If and when things don't go the way you expect them to go, how will you respond? Will you murmur, complain, and rebel, or will you humbly submit to the messenger of Elohim? I can assure you that in the future Exodus, Yahweh will not tolerate any rebellion in his camp. In fact, he specifically states this through the prophet Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 20, we read, as I live, declares Adonai Yahuwah, surely with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out, I will be king over you. I will bring you out from the peoples and gather you out of the countries where you are scattered with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will enter into judgment with you face to face. As I entered into judgment with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Egypt, so I will enter into judgment with you, declares Adonai Yahweh. I will make you pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. I will purge out the rebels from among you, and those who transgress against me. I will bring them out of the land where they sojourn, but they will not enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am Yahweh. Don't be surprised if you find yourself following someone who you don't like. Someone who pushes your buttons or just doesn't appear to be qualified. Someone who doesn't look or act the part. That may just be the one that Yahweh has chosen. It's important that we don't fall prey to rebellion and instead stay focused on Yahweh. This is an important part of our Passover preparation, discerning and repenting from any rebellion and making ourselves ready to follow directions as we sojourn out of Babylon. While we have the self-centered desire to be delivered, it's not about us, our desires, our expectations, and our appetites. It's all about Him. And the goal is not to just leave. We want to actually make it to the destination. There's no sense going into the wilderness if you aren't ready to pass under the rod. Those who carry the seeds of rebellion may actually make it out of Babylon, but they'll end up dying in the wilderness. Your observance of Passover begins in your house. Make sure that it isn't a rebellious house. Barakot, my name is Todd from ShemaIsrael.net. Shalom.